Shavua Tov. From verses in this week's Parsha and other places in the Torah, it seems clear that living in the land of Israel is a mitzvah, is a commandment that is still in force. This is the opinion of the majority of the rabbis of the Rishonim, the Ramban perhaps being the most famous. And together with this obligation to dwell in the land of Israel comes the obligation to militarily control it. We're supposed to evict the 7 nations of the land of Israel before we can take possession of it. So one could say, therefore, that it's clear that it's not enough to just live in the land of Israel, but rather that we need to have Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. So therefore, it is extremely puzzling that there are those who have a different opinion and who say that there is no commandment to dwell in the land of Israel. The Torah says repeatedly, "V'yishavtem ba," you shall dwell in it. So why do they say what they say, and what is it that they are saying, and what is behind it? And together with this, what is at the core of this commandment to dwell in the Holy Land? So the opposition starts in a Tosafot, where there is a rabbi named Rabbi Chaim, who says that in the times of the Babylonian exile, the prophet Ezekiel said to the people that Vavela yuvau v'sham yehu, you shall be brought to Babylonia and you shall remain there. So it is a positive commandment, as it were, to not be in Eretz Yisrael, to be in Bavel. And there's a charming story of one of the rabbis who wanted to go back to Eretz Yisrael, but his teacher was opposed because of this verse, and the rabbi was therefore avoiding his teacher so he shouldn't get yelled at. So we see that there is an element of not coming back to Eretz Yisrael. But the most poignant expression of this idea of not being allowed, not just not doing it, but not being allowed to do it, to have a state, to have a Jewish entity under Jewish leadership in the Holy Land, comes from a Gemara in the tractate of Ketubot. It's referring to 3 verses in the book Song of Songs of King Solomon, where the phrase Hishbati etchem, I caused you to take an oath, O daughters of Jerusalem, im ta'iru ve'im ta'oru, if you will awaken and stimulate et ha'ava, the love, ad shetechpat, until it should be desired. I have caused you, daughters of Jerusalem, to take an oath, not to raise up or awaken the love until it shall be desired, until the proper time. And the rabbis in Ketuvot say that there are 3 oaths that God made the people of Israel take, or took, regarding the people of Israel. One of these oaths is that the nation of Israel, the Jews, basically should not rebel against the nations of the world. The second one is that they should not come up to the land of Israel bachoma, in a wall, which we can interpret to mean in a military front, like a wall coming to attack. There are those who interpret it to say that if the land of Israel is protected by fortresses under the non-Jewish command, so the Israelites are not allowed to climb the wall of those fortresses to conquer the land. In other words, a prohibition on Israel, on the Jews, creating an army and fighting to control the land of Israel, that we have taken such an oath. And the third oath is that the nations of the world will not oppress the Jewish people too much. So based on this Gemara, this interpretation of the famous 3 oaths, most importantly the one that Israel swore not to attempt to militarily take over the Holy Land, comes the entire anti-Zionist ideology. And perhaps its foremost proponent was the late Satmar Rebbe, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, Rav Yoel Teitelbaum, who wrote a magnificent work about this called Vayoel Moshe, in which he goes into great detail why the modern Zionist movement is against the idea of Torah, and comes to the conclusion that it is forbidden for the Jewish nation to reestablish their state until the Mashiach comes, until there is redemption and prophecy and all of that good stuff. Now, we may tend to dismiss the ideas that he's expressing, and indeed there are problems with those ideas. They seem to go in the face of all of the Rishonim, who say, with the exception of this Rabbeinu Chaim and the Tosafot, who say that the mitzvah of living in the land is applicable today, and that should imply also militarily controlling it as well. They can answer and they can say, no, it means that you should live in the land of Israel, but you're not allowed to have a Jewish government. In other words, that you have to wait for God. That can only be a kingdom of the Mashiach and not before. So you will find that Satmar Hasidim do indeed come to live in the land of Israel, but they don't participate in anything that has to do with the government. And parenthetically, I'm not talking about the Neturei Karta, because the Neturei Karta, as far as I'm concerned, are beyond the pale. These are people that go and demonstrate together with the pro-Hamas people. Their leader was a minister. Hirsch was his name, was a minister in Yasser Arafat, Yamach Shemo's government, the minister of Jewish affairs. I guess he fancied himself some kind of a mix between Esther Hamalka and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, but he was none of the above. If you ask me, the Neturei Karta, we're dealing with a situation of mental illness and not of halachic validity. But the Satmara and the general Haredi position of many great Gedolim, great famous rabbis whose Torah we drink with great thirst, was that it is forbidden for us to jump the gun, as it were, and to have a Jewish state under Jewish control, not contradicting the mitzvah of living in the land of Israel. But how do we understand that? The first and the most important question to ask is, how can they learn such a law from a Aggadic passage of the Talmud? The first thing is, we learn laws from halachic passages, but this is an Aggadic passage. It's a legend. It's telling us a story. And furthermore, if you look into the content of these 3 oaths, it was written by King Solomon and interpreted by the rabbis. Now, King Solomon lived at the time when the kingdom of Israel was at its pinnacle. So how could we bring a proof from there to a time of exile, first of all? Second of all, the fact that the rabbis gave such an interpretation is nice, but when was such an oath taken? Are we going to say that it is forbidden for us to have a state because we took an oath? Well, who took the oath? When did this happen? There's no historical record of anything like this ever happening. We know that the nation of Israel took oaths. We took oaths at Mount Sinai to accept the Torah. And at Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval, with the blessings and the curse, we made public declarations of our faith and of our intent. But this is completely missing from history. So how do you get there? So I would like to say that I believe that the Satmara Rebbe, who was a great, great tzaddik and a great Talmid Chacham, and therefore his opinion must be taken seriously because it can help us, if nothing else, to sharpen our own opinions, that the Satmara Rebbe had an understanding of this that was beyond halacha. That rather he was looking at this particular story, this particular Agadata, as if it were a basic fundamental hashkafa, a Torah outlook. And because of his outlook, he had to come to the conclusions that he came to. And the centerpiece of his outlook is that whatever God did with us, historically, was with intent and is meant for a good purpose, and we have to be respectful of that. So first of all, the exile has a positive purpose for the nation of Israel to go to every corner of the world and to influence society and change the world. And indeed, we have done that. The second thing is that the land of Israel and the resumption of Jewish sovereignty is something that is so holy, so sublime, that it must not be done by those that are not Torah observant. And the people who started the Zionist movement were extremely secular and some of them hostile to all elements of religion. So therefore the Satmar Rebbe simply could not accept that this was God's plan, that this was legitimate. And therefore he found in these 3 oaths the hashkafa, the mindset, the worldview, which could not accept a secular building of a state. Now, even though one could ask, what if all of the people who started the Zionist movement had been religious? What if it had been the religious community? Would he accept it then? Well, according to his words, no. Because according to his words, it needs the Mashiach, it needs prophecy, it needs all of the elements of redemption. But I am doubtful of that. I believe that perhaps he would have come to a different conclusion had the Zionist movement been the initiative of the religious community and been led by great Torah scholars all the way. I think that he would have had a different conclusion. And why do I say this? Because I think that it cuts to the core of what is dwelling in the land of Israel about, what is having a Jewish country all about, what is the purpose of it. There's a nice story that's told a couple of times in the Talmud of some Chachamim who had to leave the land of Israel in order to study Torah or for some necessary purpose. And when they were traveling north on the road towards Lebanon and they got to the city of Sidon, which is already outside the boundaries of the land of Israel, they thought of the land of Israel and they started to cry. And they didn't want to go further, and they mentioned a verse from our Parsha, that you shall evict the nations from the land, and you shall inherit the land. And they remembered Eretz Yisrael, and they were very sad, and so they turned around and they went back home. They chose to forgo their mission, and go back to the land. And there in Eretz Israel, they were so happy, they said that the mitzvah of dwelling in the land of Israel is equivalent to all of the mitzvot in the Torah. And they don't bring a verse to support that assertion. It's quite an assertion. Dwelling in the land is the equivalent of all of the mitzvahs of the Torah. Why such an assertion? What do they mean by that, and why don't they bring a verse? So I think that it really cuts to the core, as I said, of what dwelling in the land is about and what having a Jewish state is about. There's a fascinating Meshech Chochmah by Rabbi Meir Simcha of Devinsk, who asks a question about Moses. Moses regretted that he would not come into the land of Israel, according to the rabbis, according to the Midrash, because there are lots of commandments that are specific to the land of Israel, mostly agricultural ones. For example, terumot and maasrot, tithes, and the gifts for the priests, and so forth and so on. There are a lot of those kinds of mitzvot that Moshe would never have the opportunity to fulfill. So he felt bad about not coming into the land of Israel. The Meshech Chochmah brings a very powerful question. What about the mitzvah of dwelling in the land of Israel itself? Moshe, if you're going to be upset about what you're missing out on, don't be upset just about the fact that you won't be able to do terumot or maasrot. Be upset about the fact that you won't get the mitzvah of dwelling in the land of Israel completely. And so the Meshech Chochmah gives an amazing answer. He says, because Moshe did fulfill that mitzvah. Wait a second, Moshe didn't go into the land of Israel. How did Moshe fulfill the mitzvah of dwelling in the land of Israel if he didn't set foot there? The answer is, he did a different part of Eretz Israel. The east bank of the Jordan River, the Jordan Valley on the east side. This was already to be now the possession of two and a half tribes of Israel, Reuven, Gad, and half of Manasseh, and therefore it has the status of being Eretz Yisrael, and anybody who dwells there with Reuven, Gad, and half of Manasseh is fulfilling the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, of dwelling in the land of Israel. Yes, there are two parts. The part to the west of the Jordan has a greater sanctity, and so therefore the commandments of terumot and maasrot and all of the commandments that depend upon the sanctity of the land are in force on the west side of the Jordan River and not on the east side, at least not on a biblical level. But nonetheless, the mitzvah of dwelling in the land of Israel applies on both banks of the Jordan. So says the Meshech Chochmah that Moshe fulfilled this commandment, which makes us need to understand something. Why are you dividing them? So I think that the answer is that having a Jewish nation is its own thing. And what is the purpose of having a Jewish nation? What is the purpose of this mitzvah of dwelling in the land of Israel? Ki mitzion teitzei Torah udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. From Zion shall go forth Torah, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. In other words, to change the world, that we have to be, to borrow a phrase from, I know Reagan used it, the shining city on the hill, that the world looks to and learns from and improves their ways. And I think with this we can understand a little better. I had a random thought that this may be connected to the rise of technology. And why do I say so? Because let's look at those three oaths again. Two of them involve the Jews in the nations of the world, that the Jews should not rebel against the nations of the world, and the nations of the world should not oppress the Jews too much. And I'm adding, force them to flee. Because God wanted the whole world to be enlightened with faith in him and with his morals and with his demands, his Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, if you will. And in the days before mass communication, the only way to do that, or perhaps even today, but certainly the most effective way to do that is through personal contact. And so the Jewish nation was exiled like no other nation has been exiled, to every corner of the world. And the Jewish nation has influenced every corner of the world, sometimes better, sometimes not enough, but certainly in a remarkably profound way. Western civilization specifically has been tremendously influenced by the Jews, and one could argue that also Eastern civilizations as well. And so therefore that is what the prophet Ezekiel is saying. They shall stay in Babylonia because they need to improve Babylonia. And that is the concept behind the oath, that the Jews should not rebel against the nations of the world. Why? Because we are there for a purpose. But by the same token, the nations of the world should not oppress the Jews too much to cause them to flee and thus lose that influence. and also that the Israelites should not return to the land of Israel en masse. Bachoma sounds en masse, completely leaving the exile, because who is going to change the rest of the world if we're not there? That is the way I understand these oaths. And, well, parenthetically, we can add that the non-Jews violated that one, the one about not oppressing the Israelites too much, certainly between the years of 1933 and 1945. And lo and behold, 3 years later, there is the state of Israel. So once they violated their side of the bargain, so then we're exempt from our side of the bargain. But the purpose of then coming back to the land of Israel is ki mitzion teitzei Torah, to influence and to change the entire world. And I think that now with technology, you'll notice that the Zionist movement built up at the time when radio was invented, television was invented, telegraph, world communications, newspapers were all over the world, and then of course modern communications which are instantaneous. Somebody in the Prime Minister office sneezes and they will hear about it in Beijing, China. So nowadays we can be that shining city on the hill and influence the entire world. I once served as a substitute rabbi in Long Island, and I was talking about the land of Israel, and in the middle of my So you saw I just turned and looked to the side. So in the middle of my speech, I did exactly that. And the entire congregation looked to where I was looking. What's he looking at? What happened? And so I said, this explains something that I never understood. You see, there are huge countries with many, many millions of people, and big things happen there, and it'll be on page 14 of the newspaper, a few sentences at the end of the page. But in this tiny little country, Israel, the Prime Minister says something, and it's the headline. How come? The answer is, it's a verse in the Torah that God's eyes are in the land of Israel, Mereshit Shana v'ad Achrit Shana. I read it a couple last week. That God's looking at the land of Israel, and if God looks at the land of Israel, then everybody else does too. The world looks at the land of Israel, and they say, is this a land of ki mitzion teitzei Torah? This is how we change the world. And so I think that really, had the Satmar Rebbe seen, had there been a strong Torah leadership of the Zionist movement, the Satmar Rebbe might have come to a different conclusion. I don't know, he's not here to ask him, but that's my own theory. And even so, I feel that maybe we have a disagreement in facts, because they looked at the secular people founding the state of Israel and said, this can't be. But as time goes on, we are building here, indeed, a land of ki mitzion teitzei Torah. That the Torah centers of the Jewish nation are moving more and more to Eretz Israel. Certainly the yeshiva that I attended in Chutz La'aretz is a great yeshiva, one of the greatest that the world has seen. But I think that one could say that the center of Torah today is moving to the land of Israel. You have every year graduates of high schools in the United States coming en masse in their thousands to study for a year. Here in Mevaseret, we have 200 boys that come from the different yeshiva high schools in America to study for a year in the land of Israel. This is our task. This is at the core. And that's why those rabbis say that dwelling in the land of Israel is the equivalent of all of the mitzvot, because the entire purpose of the Torah is to improve and to sanctify and elevate the rest of the world and the rest of humanity, because we are that shining city on the hill. We are that example. So our work, especially here in Eretz Israel, is to do that work, to bring people close to Torah, to be proud of our values, to put them on display, to not do things that will cause, God forbid, a defamation of the holy name, but rather a sanctification of the holy name in the way we live, in the way we speak, in the way we present ourselves. The more we do this, the more blessings will come, and the closer to the ultimate redemption, when all of Jewry will agree that this country, this state, this homeland is indeed a sublime mitzvah. Shavua Tov.